Welcome back, folks, to another podcast with Equip, where we help churches and organizations build discipleship cultures. And I'm here again with my good friend and colleague, Bill Bowers from Pursuing More. Hey, Bill, how you doing?
I'm doing great.
Good to be here with you.
Yeah, always a pleasure. So far.
Yeah, right. So we've been discussing over the last several episodes just different things about hindrances to discipleship, but something we really dove into, last podcast was this some things that were revealed during 2020, during COVID, when the world shut down.
Right.
And you had been working with a number of pastors down in Puyallup for a couple of years, and that shutdown and all the things that happened really stopped, a lot of things that were going on, gave people a chance to reflect and to focus. And you did a survey with many of them.
Yeah, about 14 pastors were involved in the survey, yeah.
Okay, yeah. And so go through again for us the questions, the three questions that you kind of posed to them during that survey, during that time.
Right, yeah. The three questions were about a year later, so early spring of 2021, is what was revealed during that year of COVID, 2020. What was revealed about the spiritual condition of the members of our congregation, kind of where they were in their own maturity and growth and knowing God and following God. And then what did it reveal about the way we do church, right? Some of the organizational, is that working? It revealed some things about that. And then the third piece was, what did it reveal as far as our witness to the world? What did the world see as the church went through what it went through in 2020? So those are kind of the three main questions we ask.
Yeah. So last episode, we spent a lot of time going into that first question about what was revealed about the spiritual condition of our members.
Yeah.
I mean, some things that we touched on was, just this reality of their own self-centeredness, but also the fear and the anxiety that they seem to had continued to have, even though many of them may have been sitting in church for a while and say they love Jesus and read their Bible every day. And we recognize that the pastors themselves recognized a lack of biblical literacy. And we touched on a few other things. Is that correct? About what we explored?
Yeah, just a general condition. Yeah, recognizing that maybe people weren't where we thought they were. Some of the things we assume people believed and knew, but again, they hadn't been tested yet. So again, a lot of this, it's like until something happens, you don't know.
Right.
You don't know how strong or weak you are until you suddenly have to try to lift something.
Right. Yeah, that's very true. And so during this episode, we're going to kind of jump into the second question and really look at how pastors responded to that and then our own experiences with that. And that question is what has been revealed and what have we learned regarding the priorities, functioning, and the fruits of our organizations and structures. Specifically, you're talking about church organization and structure with that. And so one of the things for Equip, what we do is we help build discipleship cultures. And so if that's the mission of Equip, that must mean that there aren't cultures of discipleship, that are functioning. And I can go more deeply into that term. But one of the first areas I want to explore is that in our church's preparation of disciples, it seemed that we weren't doing a great job at that. And so how did some of the pastors respond or, in that area, or even how did you identify? What did they identify about their organizations and structures that, kept them from this?
Right. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, looking at what we talked about last time as far as the spiritual well-being of members of the congregation, so recognizing, there's some gaps and shortages and things there, and so then if we use that in terms or use discipleship as discipleship should help them be in a better place. Okay, so that we're not in a better place, so therefore that caused us to look at what were we doing.
Right.
And I think in general, many of the statements came around the idea that a lot of the focus is on, the programs and activities and things that kind of keep people feeling okay about themselves. One of the things I talk about is the whole felt needs concept of ministry. Like people feel like they need community, so we give them community. Feel like they need stability, we give them stability, right? What they really need is God, right?
Right.
But a lot of our programs help those real areas of life, right? How to have a better marriage, how to be a better steward in your workplace, and all these things that are very practical things, and they do help people have better lives, circumstances, but they may not address the real spiritual core of things. And so, which we may refer to that more as discipleship. So there's kind of like the felt human needs, and we have programs that address those, but then there's a spiritual discipleship piece. And so bottom line is recognizing, man, we're not doing great at that. And so then the question was, well, why not? And we'd done this survey years before, earlier, asking pastors, why is it hard to actually help people become disciples? And if we have to define that, right, is they're denying themselves, they're following God, right? And it's difficult because a lot of what we spend our time doing is running the institution, if you will, right? You got to keep the building up and all that, and the staff. And so in general, the big thing is, like, we spent a lot of time focusing on keeping the institution and the things that make people feel good and really do genuinely help their lives, keeping that going. And so we haven't focused as much on the discipleship piece.
Right.
So part of that, if you look at, we're giving people what they want, but it may not be what they need.
Right.
And I did teen ministry for years, and the felt needs concept of ministry kind of works, right? But once you meet their felt need, then they don't feel like they need anything.
Right. Well, and so not only are we seem to be gravitating towards, the fire in the hallway, the felt need,
sure.
and moving to that, but there also seems to be an assumption where lots of activity equals spiritual maturity,
right.
or spiritual growth.
Right.
And we found that may or may not be true.
Right. Yeah. So, it was a fair assumption. And then we honestly didn't know it wasn't working until, right, like you have a gym and it's got all the machines, and someone comes in, you see them on the machines all the time. They must be getting healthier.
Right.
But maybe they're not. Maybe when they're not on the machines, they're out eating donuts. I don't know. Right. But I think, so that is an assumption. Hey, we've got these programs, we got a youth group, we got all these things, and people are involved, and they all have, I assume, positive assumption, they all have some good things in them that could help people grow and experience more of God and become a fully devoted follower of Christ. But we don't have a way necessarily, this is something that came in our years of doing the shifting the focus, we don't have ways of kind of measuring that.
Right.
Like there's assumption, we're putting out good stuff, something good's happening, but recognize that maybe it wasn't. And so that became obvious, right, that we weren't intentional enough about here's what this is supposed to do, here's what should happen because you're involved, and here's a way we're going to ensure as best we can, that you get something out of this.
Yeah.
So one of the language I use is the tool becomes the goal. The goal is to have a youth group. The goal is to have a men's breakfast, right, that meets once a month. But is anybody different 5 years later? We didn't ask that question.
Right.
We didn't say that was a priority. So one of the things that happened is I think pastors realized that maybe by not putting those priorities out there, the expectation that people could come and attend and not grow and not change.
Right. Because we were measuring whether they were there or not,
right,
versus whether they were growing.
Yeah, but right. My friend, we just had this conversation over in Ellensburg yesterday. The default measure of success, right, is did they come? Did they like it? Will they pay us to do it again? Right? And that works. But what they came to and what they liked may not have been beneficial to their spiritual growth.
Right. And that kind of comes back into catering to the felt needs, reality, or keeping people happy.
Right.
The kind of a title in the notes here, like keeping people happy syndrome.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. One pastor said this. He said, we probably spent too much time and energy keeping people happy, safe, and secure. Right. And if that's the goal, then we hit it. Right. They're happy, they're safe, and they're secure. Are they surrendered and abandoned to Christ and changing the world? That wasn't the goal. So part of this kind of reveals the default goal is not the same as the goal that we're stating. We say we're here for this, but the default goal is this, and we're actually hitting that pretty good.
Yeah. I mean, I can hear voices in my head of like, well, I'm a shepherd, I'm supposed to keep my sheep safe. Right? Isn't that what my job is?
Right. Yeah. And again, there's variances or variables in that, I guess, right? That I don't claim to know, right? But I would claim to know we do know where we're supposed to be heading, how we get there, right? There's unknown factors, there's different ways, but to act like we're not heading there, I think we'll never get there.
Right.
Right. We have to at least say this is where we're going, and we have some ways of measuring that and some expectations. And I think that's, and the pastors recognize that. That's the challenge, right? We don't often have a clear expectation, and there's, for the most part, not any consequence. Like if you don't grow, you can keep coming, right? And again, that's hard. I'm not saying there's an answer to that, but I'm saying it's a conversation worthy of having, right?
Right.
If people growing, experiencing more of God is really the goal.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, any great organization, I mean, you think about a doctor or a firefighter, like, well, yeah, you failed all the tests to become a firefighter, but you can go ahead and jump on the truck and go try to save some lives. Like, no, I don't want you performing CPR on me, right? To say, I mean, and we don't hold that kind of standard, as it relates. I mean, and I get the struggle, the tension with that.
Sure.
The realities of moving out of this keep people happy place. Right. I mean, again, all the disciples died trying to preach, the gospel to the nations. And so it seems like the Good Shepherd understood this reality, of that. And so there are some leadership challenges that come with those difficult assumptions, wrong assumptions, maybe I say, and how we lead, into that new area, but also personally, in their in how they view themselves, as leaders. I mean, what were some things that were talked about or said, in that area of just leadership of their congregations, their own views of themselves as leaders, as those that are meant to lead. What was discovered, in that? Right.
Well, I think a big challenge, I think that a few pastors mentioned, is just the sense of, what happened through COVID, especially, it kind of exposed like their sense of their own value, right? And part of that is like their perceived value. Did people value what they're saying, right? And in general, again, we kind of measure our value. Well, like, did people like what we said, right? So saying the hard things isn't going to necessarily, feel good, right? And being a pastor, I've never been a pastor, full disclosure, right? Seems like a pretty difficult gig, right? I mean, in the culture we're in, there's like so much difficulty to it. And I've known pastors for years and spent lots of time with pastors. And so it's really common for them to not feel valuable in what they're doing. Like, are people listening? Do they appreciate it? All the negative things people say, and the culture we're in, where if you don't like what this pastor says, you go to another one. And a lot of that happened during COVID years, right? People jumping around. Let's find somebody who agrees. Again, what we talked about last time, their personal opinion. Let's find someone that validates that. And so lots of that. So I think that's probably an ongoing challenge for pastors, right? Is to feel like valuable in what they're doing. And then in the structure, to do those difficult things. And so some of the pastors talk about just the time that it takes to actually do discipleship. They don't have time for that because they're busy doing all the programmatic things and those kind of things. And so I think that's a real challenge. And like it's not hard to understand that if I can do all these things people expect and feel successful, or I can do this thing that probably needs to be said and done and it's not going to feel good and it's not going to be received. It's like, we can lean over here. And I think that happens, and so I think it's difficult for pastors to make that decision because it's going to have personal ramifications.
Right.
And again, from the outside, I can, many times the things God has me do, I feel like, oh my gosh, I'm not in their shoes, right? Sometimes I think I don't have the right to say that, but then I think it's the right thing to say. So that's a tough gig, and I don't have a lot of close pastor friends. But like, we all have to answer to God, right?
Right.
And then it's difficult. So yeah. So it was very challenging time.
Well, I think we're talking about what was revealed about the structure, right? And the organization and the churches here. And I think you touched on a few things that So discipleship in and of itself, the close nature with which that takes, and it does involve programs, it does involve, sermons, it does involve teachings and fellowship in multiple different areas. But one of the places that it's lacking, especially as Equip has found, is kind of that one-on-one or that one-on-two, that personal time to be able to dig in. And that takes time. Our Lord took 3 years with 12 people and we think we can do it with 5,000, right? Or 500, right. Even so. and they busy themselves, or maybe not intentionally or whatever, but there's so many programs to run and the function of the church and running the organization makes them too busy for that. But likewise, if they're struggling with insecurity, if they're struggling with their own fear, if they're struggling with their own sin, I've found, 99% of them have nowhere to turn. Right. There's nowhere to deal with that. And so there's an expectation that they don't even have that's not true of me. Right. So let's just keep pressing on. Right. And we wonder why so many in the last 5 years, how many Christian leaders have fallen, because of some of the, because of these realities that it seems like the organization, perpetuates.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, again, the whole institution, the organization, there's so many trappings in it, period, right? Because of all the elements of the consumer, you give the consumer what they want, and then the expectations. And so, pastors can't, one of the pastors said, when you talk about the discipleship, he said we probably haven't been close enough to members to really know where they are spiritually, right? And I don't have the time and energy to do that. And so who is doing that? And so I think one of the, a general statement again is how programs, so it's like I can't meet individually and do this, so we create a program that has the elements in it, but it lacks that personal interaction. Right. And so again, great information, but if there's not that personal interaction, that's a bigger systematic problem, right? So when you guys talk about, reframing discipleship, like that's got to be a piece of it. It's not a better program. Programs can be useful, but a program can't be the goal, right? And if there's not that personal relationship, if it's not someone else experiencing that, walking you through it, then it's just not going to happen.
Right.
So, yeah. Right. So many things about the way the institution has evolved, I suppose you would say, make it really difficult. Not impossible. I can't believe it's impossible.
Right.
But it's certainly very difficult to help move people into language, is that apprenticeship, right? You can't do an apprenticeship in the classroom. We've learned out some stuff. I just finished doing a series with some people, and we did the 4th class, and when the 5th class came, I said, okay, this is the practicum. We're going to do this together, and then you're going to be an apprentice, and you'll start doing this yourself. And so I think, the student model, which I think is a lot of what our church model can be, is we're giving great information and they're great students, but they never get shifted over to become an apprentice or do a practicum with somebody.
Right.
For a couple of years, I got to do practicums with kids or young people from University of Washington. And we would actually do stuff together for it was 6 or 7 months, where they came out and worked in the ministry and actually got to do stuff, and that was their practicum. And then when they graduated, then they're out getting jobs doing that. And I think some of that, we recognize is probably something that needs to get a little more built into the church model, and not just keep it a student-based information sharing situation.
Right. So it deems that the model, will have to change, will have to shift in order to provide space for the pastors to do this, to challenge, again, their own emotional health. We're, our church is going through emotional healthy leader, right now, as it.
A lot of churches went through that. 2021, 2022, yeah.
As it relates, I remember talking to a pastor, or working with a pastor down in Latin America, who I was coaching to begin to start taking a Sabbath. Okay, Mr. a pastor is a national leader, been in the ministry for so long, but has never taken a Sabbath. I mean, something that was so ingrained in how Jesus walked, and something that's been, seems unchanging to me. Right. But he said he couldn't because his congregation would get angry if he took a day off. Right. And so again, the culture that we're seeing, our own busyness and the Latin American culture, being rivaling us, I think, in its busyness, realities. And so, how do we create the space for apprenticeship, and how do we create the space for deep discipleship under the current structure? Right. I mean, I think there are ways of making some changes, but it's going to take some deep cuts in order to see that happen.
Yeah. So
what has the shift in the core of our organizations, of the pastors, of those that lead, you know, in order to see kind of that happen.
Yeah. Well, just to be honest, I'm not a strategy guy. I'm a motive guy. I think if we clarify the goal and the motive, the strategy will work out. So for me, with that disclaimer, not being the strategy guy, I think the core element is, what are we really pursuing? And I don't know if I've had a chance to share my favorite quote yet, but here it comes.
Come on.
Here it comes. The clearer the object of our pursuit is, the more likely we will be able to adopt the means to obtain it. If we're clear on where we're going, then we can figure out how to get there. So that's why, to me, it's like, where are we going and why? Because God wants that for us. Like, that's ought to be a compelling reason. So if we have a compelling reason and we know where we're going, then we figure out the strategy, right? And so I think this is the element that we maybe haven't been clear on. Where are we going? What does it mean to help someone become a fully devoted follower of Christ? Whatever language we want to use, right? They're sold out. They took up their cross. They denied themselves. They're following Jesus, and they're growing and maturing into the fullness of Christ, Ephesians 4. Like, if we're clear on that, then okay, how are we going to get there? And we've had this conversation with pastors, and when you clarify that, they would like, I remember talking with one pastor this one time. He's passed away now, actually, but he said, well, I would do this and do this and have guys meeting like this, but I can't do that, right? Or we do this and do this, and but I don't know. Well, I do this, but I don't know. I had to stop him. I was laughing. I said, you do know. You know exactly what you would do. You just can't do it in the context of the church you're functioning in, right? If that context wasn't there, this is exactly what you would do unto that goal. And so that's, again, I'm a motive guy. Let's get clear on where we're going, clear on the motive, and then let's figure it out, you know. And again, many conversations with pastors, and they have ideas. It seems like the culture, the structure is dictating what we can or cannot do. And I think that's true. I can't pretend like that's not true. I think it's true.
Right.
I think most pastors are doing the best they can in the context they have to work with. But if that context isn't working, that's the bigger shift.
Yeah.
It's like, are we willing to change a culture, right, for the sake of the kingdom?
Right. Yeah. I agree with that 100%. I mean, that's what Equip does, is to build cultures of discipleship. Right. But one of the quotes we lean on, you know, is from Peter Drucker, who says that culture eats strategy for lunch.
Yep,
right. And so you can put the best discipleship strategy, but if it's laid on top of a consumer culture, it'll never work. It'll work a little bit, maybe.
It can make a little difference, but that's the problem. Yeah, you can't take a surrender message into a self-centered context and culture and expect it to change things very much. You've got to change the culture,
right? And we're satisfied with just one or two people being radical out of all that. Well, then they end up leaving because they're going to go be radical while we're still being mediocre. But I think it's possible. Right? I mean, I think it's possible for this and to awaken that reality in pastors and in congregants that no, there's more, you know, in this. And I think God, not only does God desire more, but there's more of God to behold and to encounter and to grow into. That I think is the hope of this.
That's it. If you want to end on a note of hope, that's it. It's possible. And I know pastors who have tasted it, who have seen it happening, right? And there's a real tension. I've got to keep this thing going. And then over here, they're mentoring two young people. And they're like, oh my gosh, it's amazing, right? And so it's like, okay, let's do that. So so it's possible. God wants it. So I think that's the good news. Again, the revelation of what we've seen, great stuff. It'll help us lean into something different, but that'll be the hard choice.
Yeah.
Do we want to pursue that? Are we willing to pursue that? And I believe, just like in our personal lives, when we say, yes, God, I want what you want, let's go. I think he's very gracious and kind and, you know, will lead us in that direction. But it's that willing piece that's on us.
Yeah. I just, you know, I call myself to that reality, call those in leadership to that reality. I mean, the organization is just what it is. You know, I mean, without the people behind it, it's nothing.
It can be a great tool, but it's a lousy goal.
Right. Absolutely. And so, I mean, to bring ourselves into alignment with what God wants and going forward with that. I mean, this is, so again, the question we've been looking at is just what was revealed about our structures and organizations, as a church from COVID. And again, it heightened what was already there. I mean, so this isn't brand new. It didn't just change, when COVID happened. It's been this. I mean, as we've studied Andrew Murray and Charles Spurgeon and all these guys from the 1800s, they're saying the same things that we're encountering, today with this. And so, again, I hope we're bringing hope. I hope we're bringing a voice and just structured knowledge, words to hopefully what's been going on in people's hearts, and that there's a way forward. People willing to walk, with you in the midst of that. So as we come to a close, Bill, is there anything, that you want to share in summary or in closing or in?
I think again, the hope is God shows us things for the purpose of leading us into better things. And I think we just need to respond to that.
Yeah. Amen. Well, we're going to continue on with this podcast. We have one more episode as we talk about the last question in the midst of your survey. So I'm excited to get into that. And so all of those that are listening, you're going to remember to subscribe, look into pursuing more, the ministry that Bill runs. Equip, yes. Those of you that want to look into Equip. But until next time, just continue surrendering and growing in God.
Amen.